it's Alex from Blacksheep IT Consulting, and today I'm happy to be able to present to you the major feature of the latest devpops 23.6 release, which is the Dependency Finder. So in the new menu, we're only using the new menu from now, you will find under Helpers, Dependency Finder. So I will give you a quick demo here and you'll be thoroughly impressed. And then I'll, lay out the details how that actually works. And later on you will see a demo how to extend that by yourself to search for additional. So now let's choose an object type. You see you can choose any typical object type, such as applet, business component, and so forth. So, and then you enter the desired object that you want to look up and find dependencies for. So let's start with something simple like the contact list applet and click find dependencies. And you notice it searches in various areas such as views. So it scans any views that include that applet. There's a details button. So, okay, this applet appears in the contact list view and in this view and so forth. That's fine. And we also have a hit in the manifest, so, or three actually. So the applet has a physical renderer, presentation model, and web template registered. It's the contact list applet after all, which has this demo with the map button and card button. Let's look up another applet like account MVG applet, because that's obviously an MVG applet, and you can see a few hits appear in the control area. So 50 controls use this as the MVG applet, 107 list columns, and as always you can click details and see a little bit more insight, especially the parent name or grandparent name in that case, the applet name where it's mapped. So it's easy to identify, okay, this object, this applet is referenced in various places. There's also a data export button. What does it do? So it writes the current results cumulatively, so to a simple HTML table, displays it, and can also copy it to your clipboard if you want to. So down here we should see the latest search. Yeah, so the account MVG applet is used in this control and this applet and so forth. So this is of course a good way to export that stuff to Excel and for further analysis or documentation. Okay, let's do one more. Let's go, for example, and look for a business component such as, well, price list maybe. And you see for business components we search in a lot more places. We look for applets, referencing that, business object components, state models, workflow steps. So this can be quite extensive, and there are even two hits here in the vanilla repository that I'm using. The repository business service server script. So business service server scripts have two references, as you can see. Get boostcom price list is in the code. We even inspect the code a little bit. There might be some false positives, but better some false positives than false negatives in this case. And there's the parent name, so that's the business service, which has subscript using that business component. Okay, that's really nice, I would say. Let's do one more. Let's do business service, because that also, before we do that, let's use that tidy up button, which tidies up the UI and also clears all the caches, the HTML export cache that you have seen and any other caches. And now we're in for a much longer query, because business services can be in a lot of places, can be referenced in a lot of places. So let's just look, for example, EI Siebel adapter and click find dependencies. So yeah, you see a lot going on. So there is actually business services are searched for references in Open UI JavaScript. So the system has tries to retrieve all the JavaScript and load it in the browser and do a text search. So it found 2 hits already. And you notice there's a enter credentials dialog blocking the rest of the view. Well, not really. So we can wait for that to happen later, and I'll tell you in a moment. So let's just see. Okay, there's a postload.js, devpops.js, you guessed it, which have references to EI Siebel adapter. Nice enough. There's also some client-side script, business service client script, and other workflow steps that reference 600 plus workflow steps that reference this business service. So, and what's this credentials about? They are needed to connect to the cloud gateway. Now we're going a little bit into what's going on behind the scenes. So the queries you see are mostly done through the REST API, except the OpenUI JavaScript, which is just getting the files and analyzing the text in the browser. And we're also looking up things in the enterprise configuration. So we're using the Cloud Gateway REST API, which requires, you guessed it, credentials. And if you enter your credentials and hit go, then a lengthy query will happen into the Cloud Gateway because we're looking for that business service, for references to it in any named subsystem. So there are like 40 named subsystems, and we have to query each one. So you will encounter some slowness here, because maybe we can see that right now in the network tab. Not really. Okay, maybe when you have that developer tool open right away, you see a lot of activity on the network, multiple queries running in parallel. And it just takes a while to fetch this data from the Cloud Gateway, and it's cached. So when we do a second run, it will be much faster. Okay, it has finished, however. And here are 3 hits in the EI data handling subsystem. So this subsystem is using EI Siebel adapter as the dispatch service, for example. Okay, so let's just prove the claim. When you have managed to wait out the big queries against the Cloud Gateway and the files, then this is cached. So any subsequent, don't click tidy up because that clears the cache, but click find dependencies again. And see, it's now much faster using the cache data, still yielding the same results here. So that's the principle of using the Dependency Finder. Select your object type, and you see we have plenty of object types already listed here, and you will be pleased to hear that this is an extensible concept. So if you miss anything here, like let's say index or whatever, then you can add it here to this drop down, and you can also add queries or remove them if you want. If you positively not using any browser script, you can remove that, so the query is faster. So how does this all work? And we have to go into the postload.js file of the latest devpops, where you will find a 23.6 plus repo scanner section. So this is all the code down here below for that repo scanner or dependency finder, which is not only scanning the repository, but anything you wanted, anything you can put a business component on, really. So there's one helper function here. Let's ignore that. And the main global variable, if you will, is a configuration object, a JSON object, which stores the configuration, what to search, like applet, and where to search, like within Fuse or associate applet, or controls, look for MVG applet. So you see there, those sections have kind of a name, a label, if you will, and specify a business component and a query template using the object name you enter in the text box, and a list of fields that are returned, and an X field for the data export feature that you have seen. So you can imagine it's fairly easy to extend that by simply copying one of these sections, pasting it in down below and changing the values, given that the business component is already present, exposed through a base integration object that is used for the main bunch of the queries. We also use Cloud Gateway, and we also retrieve JavaScript files for OpenUI, as you have noticed. So there are special sections, such as for business component, for example, to aggregate the scripts, the repository scripts, into one query that spawns out across all the repository places where scripts are. And you notice we literally scan the script code for anything with buscomp, like get buscomp, and anything with the object name in double quotes, in brackets. So that should give us a good result that this business component is really referenced and used. And there are features like a repository script is scanned for line by line, and comments are detected if the code is commented out and such. So there's not enough time really to go through each and every line of the code, but this is the major structure to define what to look up, like business service, and where to look it up. So you get the general idea. And with the help of Jason, thanks very much to Jason from American Airlines, this has grown really big, and we would like to see your input here in the comments or in any occasion where we meet again on the Siebel Friday, etc. If you have additional ideas what dependencies to look up, then we can add them here as we go through the next versions of devpops. So this is fairly huge. Yeah, so let me scroll down here all the way. And so here's table, here's view, here's workflow process, and that's it. And then starts the functions proper. So you see that the functions use the configuration variable that we have just seen. And of course, you could think of other ways of storing that configuration. Storing it right in the JavaScript is possibly the worst idea, but devpops is not about the best implementation. It's about being an educational library. And educational means, at the risk of repeating myself, you should never use this in mission-critical environments. You should just use it for your own OpenUI or general Siebel education. So use this code at your own peril, as usual. So this one literally runs the scans, and you will notice down here a function called repo scan fetch data, which does the bunch of fetching using the JavaScript fetch an asynchronous function to, well, first define a URL into the REST inbound data API and concatenate all the stuff, fields and search spec and page size, because there might be more than 100 results and so forth, including workspace and version. So you can really inspect the workspace and then see those objects as they are in that workspace. And there's the big fetch. And if we got good results, then we scan the scripts, we process the export data, manifest files get some special treatment, and then we show the result. And this is what you see on the UI. So those little cards pop up with the results. Of course, there's more to it. There's some more code you might want to investigate. It's using Shoelace, by the way. So the Shoelace library is downloaded. That's why it looks so pretty without much effort. And there's some helper functions down here, which, for example, help popping up that export data and pop up that details. Oh, generating a bit of HTML here to show that. Okay, so that's, let's look at it one more time. Why not? Let's do a query for maybe a field. Let's say price list ID. And as you can see, a field with that name is found in 433 business components. Yeah, it's used in 3 applet search specs. And as always, you can get into details there. And yes, indeed, the price list ID, there's the field reference. So indeed, that is used in that applet search spec. One BC sort spec, BC user properties, no state models, applet controls, it's used in 188 workflow steps. And it's even referenced in some business component. Business service server scripts. And again, the scripts are scanned for active code. So here, price list ID is used in get field value here. Okay, so that's the basic functionality. And stay tuned if you want to see how to add any business component to the master integration object. So you will see the insight into the repository in the next demo. Thanks much for watching this part, and make sure to watch the next demo so you can see the repository side of things and learn how to extend it if you want to. Okay, so thanks very much. So let's take a look at the repository side of this Dependency Finder feature. First of all, the REST API requires a base integration object. Now, 23.5 and higher, of course, has dynamic integration objects, but they just won't cut it for this special implementation. So we still have a base BCRM repository details integration object that you will import through the ZIF file. If you look that up, it's a fairly regular internal integration object which references quite a lot of business components, many of which are representing design repository data, such as applets and applet browser scripts, applet server scripts, but there are also some arbitrary non-repository based business components like audit trail buscomp, EI object map, FINS validation rule, and so forth. So it has, in the current state, it has 60 different business components. So quite a wide range of things to look for. And that's the base for the REST API. But behind this integration object, there must be a business object. And of course, you can clean that easily from the external name or just remove the base. And that's the business object. So has, of course, business object component. The primary is repository, so the main repository record. And as you will notice, most or all of the design repository business components use a regular link, while the arbitrary business components don't use any link. And stay tuned for the next part of the video where we extend that so you understand those links and when to use a link and how to synchronize the integration object. So that's demonstrated in a moment. Yeah, so you would imagine that it's fairly easy to add a business component here into that business object, be it a standard vanilla or a custom like this one, a clone of something or something you create on your own, something you create on top of a view, a VBC that you'd employ. So you can literally look up anything if you put enough effort to it. And it all lands in this one business object. And then once you have all the business components in place, and for example, in an extension scenario, you will synchronize the integration object. So these two objects, that business object and its base integration object, play the main role behind the scenes. So now let's take a look how we can extend that model. So let's take a look here in the next few minutes how to extend the Dependency Finder. So here, as an example, I navigated to the Workflow Policy Actions view, where you can define the actions for your workflow policies. Nowadays, most of the actions have run workflow process as the sole program, and in the arguments, you actually specify a process name argument and the application mortgage. Here is the name of an workflow process, not necessarily active since this is the sample database, but you are quite familiar with that process. So a reference to a workflow process is found here, and now to extend the dependency finder to include that business component, that's the steps that follow. So make sure you watch carefully. So first we need to identify the business component. So I shall use the X-ray feature of devpops, which gives me the name of the very business component here. So I can copy that. And I also can clean into the field name. So default value is actually the field where we're going to look for that workflow process name. But first things first, to Siebel Tools we go and create a workspace. And now let's find first any link to the repository business component. So that means we need to be able to add it using a link to the business object, because we're going to synchronize the integration object. So if you have imported the zip file, you will find under the blacksheep devpops projects a host of dummy links which use a repository as the parent, like this one. And those have been created to facilitate the extension. So you will have to use those, but you will have to add a new one for your designated new child BC. So wise to copy one of these. So the project and the parent is fine. And now paste the child business component name. Usually no need to try and link those for source and destination fields, because there is absolutely no relation to the repository whatsoever. So this is a real dummy link. But it's needed, as you will see. So now we have that link in place. We can go ahead to the business object. So find the BCRM repository details business object. That's the main business object for the dependency finder, the business object behind the integration object. So we need to extend that first. Business object component we go. And the delivered state only should include the links where you have real relationships. Any designed repository business component like repository applet, that link is okay, that works. And you notice any odd business component that is not related to the repository, like audit trail bus comp or any custom BC that you create, there is no link, because when you keep using that dummy link, it will fail because actually the link doesn't work. So you have to remove it. So to prepare for this synchronization of the integration object later on, you have to actually add in all the links. And you can easily notice by the comments, it says use dummy link when synchronizing IO, remove dummy link before delivering. So you just need to temporarily add that dummy link. So that's why they are in the zip file. So I'm just keep quickly adding here those links temporarily. And there's some down below. So scroll down and you will find more objects, more business components without a link. So again, temporarily add those links back. Don't forget to remove them later. So now we have re-established all the links. Well, you might ask, what's with this one? That's the primary, so that has no link. And now we're ready to add any number of new components. Copy paste the name or search it. And now we can open the pick list and we find that dummy link. And it's wise to add a comment with the same description, so anybody reading this hopefully will know what to do here. So that's workflow policy action argument, yeah, something like that along these lines, and uses a dummy link. So that's step one. And now the business object is ready to be synchronized or be used for synchronization of the integration object. So the integration object is called base BCRM repository details. You notice there's a bunch of, in my repository, bunch of inactive ones, which are the result actually of the synchronization. This is basically the old version before any synchronization, but you won't have them in your C file. So now we can select the integration object and click synchronize. So remember, we have put all the links back in place, because otherwise the synchronization feature will ignore or even remove the business components. So a good check is that all the business components are still in place, and the one you want to add is, of course, to be selected now. And don't forget to add new fields as active, because the default's inactive. So any field in that PC will be an inactive integration component field, which you probably don't want. So make sure to click active. If you have added more business components using this technique, select them all. Make sure you keep everything else selected, unless you want to remove it from the API, and then click next. Now that should be fairly straightforward. There might be errors, especially when you add something where the underlying table has a character large object column, a CLOB. That happens for scripts, for example. Now all the scripts are mapped out, but if you encounter that error, then you need to temporarily change the field type from dtype underscore CLOB or CLOB to dtype underscore node. Then run the synchronization and change the field type back. Don't forget that, because otherwise you're breaking the logic. So now you can click finish, and it will take a while. It's good to see that this synchronization feature is, of course, still worthwhile after all these years in Siebel tools. And it will actually treat us to a comparison of the old and new version. So that old version will have a row ID in the name. They will accumulate in your repository as inactive, and that's fine. They're not delivered. It's quite big, so let's be patient. I'm not speeding this up on purpose so you see the real behavior in the real time. And of course, if you press record, then the computer slows down. And we still have to wait for the comparison to pop up, and there it is. So if you wish, you can now compare to make sure everything is in order. Let's just check the workflow action argument has been added. So on the second selection, we have the new version, or so to speak, of that integration object, and here's the old one. There are slight differences. You can ignore them. That's probably just fine with key fields, etc. Don't worry about the keys. We're only using this integration object for queries. And if you close that, the wizard will finish and you will get the integration object. Let's check one more time that our new workflow action argument or any other business component is now represented by an integration component, and check out the fields. They should all be active because we chose to do that, and that's not the default. So be aware to pick that. Okay, so now go back to the business object and remove, once you're done with that, remove the dummy links. Yes, you have to remove them. So we could probably search for comments is not null, and then use change records to clear the link. Okay. Do an empty query again, just to check. So anything with a comment, more or less, shouldn't have a link. And of course, the primary shouldn't have a link too, which is great. So now we are in a developer workspace, so we can test drive the integration. So, for example, fire up Postman. And I prepared the query. If you can clean the query from the postload.js. So it's, of course, v1.0/data, that's the REST API for data. BCRM repository details, that's our business object. The primary business component, that's the repository. The asterisk is interesting. Yes, any repository, there should be only one. And then that's a child BC. So I already prepared that statement here, workflow action argument. And the code also uses page size, so kept it close to the code. And I'm specifying the workspace, which is a neat feature of the REST API or EI Object Manager, can basically use a workspace on the fly. So we're using let's just check out the workspace name. Yes, repo scan 010 or 10, version 1. So we're using the underlying infrastructure as of that workspace. And you see I got an error message when I first tried it. So now let's see if that gets any better. So we should yield, some data. That is basically the list of records. And you can start putting together your search spec. For example, the default value, remember that? That was a workflow name, right? It even has a repository ID, which is, okay, there you go. So you could be using the link, but you shouldn't. It works without the link as well. So let's try a search spec. So default value. And let's glean an example from the application. So there's a workflow process name, automatic data retrieval, which I will be actively looking for, simulating what the Dependency Finder does later, like so. Well, brackets are not needed, but... And now that should yield at least that one record. Now we have seen there might be more records if that workflow process is used in more records, but it's not. Okay, that looks promising. So now we can practically deliver this or keep testing that workspace if you keep adding business components. And now let's create an expression in the postload.js file to specify looking up a workflow process in the workflow action argument business component. So I start by copying the business component. And here I'm in the postload.js code where you will be looking for a global variable called bcrm underscore repo underscore scan underscore cfg, which is fairly big actually, as you can see in the side display. And this lists all the queries for all the dependencies. If you look for workflow process, it looks in job templates, applet user properties, BC user properties, looks for sub-processes, and well, you can, of course, establish your own sense of order here. I just keep adding here workflow policy action. That's the label. So that's a arbitrary text you can use. And now with the BC, of course, you have to use the exact BC name. And the second property is the actual query. Now, if you tested it in Postman already, you can just, copy paste that stuff. and look out for any fields that indicate inactive or so. But I'm not aware of any field where you could see is this active or not. So it could be helpful to filter the inactive ones. But in this case, we might have some false positives because the policy isn't even used, etc. So, but anyway, there's a reference we found. So the query is quite simple here. We can remove the brackets now. And of course, you don't use the direct name, you use the template. We only have one template in this version of devpops, object name. So if you look for a specific workflow, it just makes a direct comparison. Notice that other queries include like, so you can produce your Siebel query language here. And the fields you want to be returned. You're probably interested in that default value field. I should really be copy-pasting here. So that's a list of fields given to the REST API, because you don't want all the fields usually. And what's interesting as well, so there are some IDs. The name is always process name. The action program name, well, that's always run workflow process really. So there's not really much here of worth. So there might be a parent ID or whatever. We have an action ID, so let's pick that one. So for further, let's say, or action program ID, let's pick both of these IDs for further investigation. And the final property you have to set is X field. And that's an arbitrary text describing the match logic. And usually it's a field name. It will appear in the data export panel where you have that HTML table that you saw. So you can specify what's in that value for that column. And in this case, let's use the field name default value, for lack of a better explanation. You could add some more text here. Okay, so now we have expanded the global configuration variable. So now the dependency finder logic will pick that up and execute the search. And of course, we shall test it. So I'm copying that post-load version to the machine, replacing my current version. I go back to a client where I can test, so I do an empty cache and hard reload in that client. And I will use devpops to inspect the workspace I still haven't delivered. And now I can run the dependency finder. And we're testing workflow process. And let's see that workflow process I used for testing. That's the name. Let's see if we can find that now. So workflow process is one of the entities that is also scanning the enterprise configuration. And since we did a hard reload, we lost all the caches. So that will take a bit longer. I used to wait until the Open UI JavaScript. In that case, it's also not cached, so it's retrieving all the files, is finished, because then you see there are 0 hits in the background, and that credentials dialog is actually just waiting for you to enter valid credentials for the enterprise configuration search connecting to the cloud gateway. We can hold that off, as you can see, because I can see workflow policy action already has 1 hit. And that's, well, it doesn't give us much, but there's one reference to that workflow in workflow policy action. So if you want to inactivate that workflow, check out those actions. That's what it says. It doesn't seem to be referenced much else. And if you want to make sure it's not referenced in the enterprise configuration, then you can click cancel here. But I click go anyway, and it's always interesting to see that we are fetching here named subsystem parameters. You know, there are 3 types. So for each named subsystem, we have to fetch the standard, advanced, and hidden parameters. So as you can see in the network tab, that's quite a lot of requests firing off to the cloud gateway. I haven't found a better way to do that because there's no like flat search in Zookeeper. And it takes quite a while the first time. That's why I included a caching mechanism. Of course, the cache is voided when you do a hard reload. But when you keep using Dependency Finder, then the cache is used, and the tidy up button, remember that from the demo, tidy up button also clears up those caches for the Open UI JavaScript files and the enterprise configuration, because quite a lot of things going on. And seems to be finished while I was babbling, and there are 0 hits for that workflow in the EI data handling subsystems, which is expected. That's probably a non-existent workflow anyway. Okay, final steps in your extension of this is, of course, to make sure you have the business object back in working order with those links removed that you needed to add temporarily, and your integration object is working. So do some other queries there if you will, and then of course deliver the changes, and make sure when you actually update devpops in a later time, if you have made custom entries, make sure to save that repository scan configuration and then merge it with the devpops you download later with a later version, because you could have new instructions here and you have to merge it with yours. Also didn't find a better way to do that, but devpops is educational after all, and I hope you feel educated now. So thanks for watching.